first talk will be given by Professor Niranjana Sengupta from IISER Kolkata. So Niranjana, you have 30 minutes for talk and 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much, Arnab. I hope the screen is visible because I had to quit and enter. Okay, thank you very much. And thanks also to the organizers for, this is the first time I'm speaking in RARE. And it's actually, a great pleasure to be here. So thank you very much. What I want to lay out today is more of a journey than perhaps any end results. We are actually new to these, we are actually starting out. So I just wanted to relate to you, our journey over the last few years towards, building, some efforts towards building algorithms which will hopefully help in the enhanced sampling of biomolecular systems. So before I begin, I just want to say that the people who have accompanied us on this journey are quite a few. This is a figure taken, let me just go to my laser pointer. This is our group lunch a little bit before COVID started. So, there are some recent and past group members. It's an admixture. Some people have left, some are still around. But this journey started when Pallab, who is right now a PhD student in my group, came to me. He's sitting right here. He came to me in, I think, end of 2016 and expressed that, he would like to do some kind of computations for biomolecules. So we started off, and coincidentally at that time, I had somebody visit me after a talk, who was actually working in space sciences. And, I was just told that, look, you have so much data, you should start thinking of using Bayesian statistics. So I kind of introduced Pallab to this person, and the journey kind of triggered extempore over there, without much of a planning. But I think we have come a bit of a way since then, and I'll try to lay out a journey. Generally, in my group, we are interested in understanding the behavior of biomolecules under a variety of conditions. Okay, so this is a schematic of an energy landscape. And essentially, we are interested in understanding that if we subject these states to a variety of perturbations, such as what you have in a real biological environment, what do you expect? So along the way, and of course, we are also interested in, estimating the transition rates between different states. So I'm highlighting some of the states that we are interested in. And along the way, we have looked at how these perturbations in the form of solvent crowding, in the form of surface interactions, and when you have extreme conditions, when you have structural modifications, either chemically inside a cell or imposed otherwise, how do these states respond? So in the past, we have looked at the, how surfaces affect the free energy landscapes, and we conquered that the role of surfaces can be ambiguous. Very more recently, we have looked at how surfaces, which are confining surfaces, can have an effect on biomolecular conformations and how do the stabilities change. We do find that if you do an ultra confinement, you can actually change the ratios of the native and the folded and the unfolded states. We are also interested in what happens when you subject protein assemblies to extreme conditions. So we have been looking at the so-called cold denaturation or cold dissociation, and can we generalize some of the results? So, and very more recently, we have started looking at how the solvent affects these interactions. So in different ways and forms, we are interested in biomolecular response anyways. This is also an example of a recent work where we are looking at how the non-structural protein of a protein which is essential for Zika replication. What happens if we force some allosteric conformational changes there, right? How do we expect the free energy pathways to change? So these are kind of a little bit of a wide overview of what we do, but essentially we are interested in determining the free energies of transformations under different conditions. As a function of what kind of reaction coordinate, that's an open question. That depends on the actual system that we are looking at. But and this audience is not, I need not underscore this for the current audience, finding these can be extremely difficult. and also computationally challenging. So, if you have limited resources, this journey itself is quite arduous, and the open-ended questions are, sorry. What is the location of the transition state? Can we find, suitable descriptors? What are the magnitude of these barriers? And if these three questions work out, then can we actually reproduce some transition rates very satisfactorily? So these are very open-ended questions. And what we found is, what we kind of started working on is, we started using some very simple ways, statistical ways, to at least find the heights of the barrier heights of the transition states. Okay, so as we have been hearing, since this is the second day of RARE, and this is what the RARE conference is about, I understand, is, can we discover novel methods? Can we go into efficient determination of, can we efficiently determine, can we kind of come up with learning-based algorithms? Can we find efficient ways of looking at these reaction coordinates? Essentially, can we complete the free energy picture here? Okay, so we have come up with a rather simple algorithm, which we name expectation maximized molecular dynamics, and I will discuss with you, what are the scenarios in which it works, and what could be the potential limitations, and to what extent can we push it? Can we really take it to more complex systems? So again, this is something that needs no introduction to this audience, is that when we have an underlying free energy landscape, and there are certain degrees of freedom which are easy to sample, we can actually sample these. If these barrier heights are, just a few kcal per mole, perhaps we can sample this without any biases. But then we do have some missing data. But somehow, if we can complete the entire distribution, we can actually attempt to, get a picture of the free energy differences. So what we resort to are Bayesian methods, okay, where we actually assign certain distributions, okay, to the unknown states. And if we can, in a probabilistic manner, if we can determine, which are the best distributions which can give us these, which are the best fits for these distributions, then we can perhaps complete this picture. It's kind of diagrammatically explained here, assuming that the distributions are Gaussian. Okay, so again, if we have a set of Gaussians, we can find the relative probability that a certain data point comes from a certain Gaussian. And if we iterate it, and if we update the Gaussians, we can determine, the best way in which this entire data can be modeled. And once we complete the entire distribution, we can actually get the free energy differences between the corresponding states. So what we also did was, we actually coupled the expectation maximization algorithm to what we call necessary and sufficient sampling algorithm. Okay, so even for the minima, even for the positions of the minima, we do not want to waste time. We do not want to waste computational time doing unnecessary sampling. So if we use this two ways, it overall increases the efficiency. So again, I'm just laying it out in a flowchart kind of way, but essentially, if we use expectation maximization both ways, we should be able to reduce the sampling time effectively. And that's something that I'm going to show. What we also discovered along the way is that if we have periodic collective variables, torsion angles, for example, Gaussian is perhaps not the best way to sample this, and a very related distribution known as the von Mises distribution, where you use the modified Bessel function of order 0. Okay, this k is kind of an inverse of the standard deviation. Mu is a representation of the mean. If we use a function of this kind, then we don't have to deal with complexities at the boundaries for periodic functions. So using this, with this information in the background, we started with very simple systems. I'm just looking at proline isomerization here. And as a benchmark, we used a very conventional method, adaptively biased molecular dynamics. And we start with 3 independent simulations with the EMMD method, with the necessary and sufficient sampling incorporated. And if we do that, we find that if you compare it with your benchmark ABMD, with the EMMD, with the von Mises distribution, we can actually fairly satisfactorily at least sample the cis to trans isomerization. So that worked very well. So this was the first point, and it was quite encouraging for us. Again, but we found that if we use the Gaussian mixture model, it doesn't work very well. So depending on what kind of collective variable you have, it's a better idea perhaps to switch to the other distribution. Now, if you again look at alanine dipeptide, again, perhaps the hydrogen atom of rare event sampling, we find again that, if you're looking at this and if you are able to actually assign the minima, okay, that you can do with standard sampling, we again used expectation maximization to kind of restrict the amount of sampling at the minima. What we do find is that, again, referencing with ABMD, we find that we can sample more or less the correct energy landscape with roughly 2 orders of magnitude less sampling time. So the efficiency is significantly increased, and one could argue that the free energy landscape is not extremely off. Okay, of course we are not perfect, but again, this is one method. Perhaps with other methods and with even higher sampling, you could putatively get to a better representation. Again, then we tried it with this particular protein, beta-2 microglobulin, and it has been experimentally shown that at position 32, where you have proline in the cis form, if you start fluorinating that proline, the cis to trans barrier is effectively changed, is altered. Okay. So we tried to reproduce this. We fluorinated, we did not do it for the whole protein, but we took the fluorinated form of proline, and we found that, if this this order is, can we reproduce it with the EMMD method? And we find that we do. However, when we start fluorinating, the absolute error between the reference method, ABMD, and EMMD, it starts increasing. Now, that could be perhaps because, we could use better force fields, perhaps because, the fluorinated state with perhaps a different method other than ABMD could have done better. We don't know. But what we do find is that the order in which we get this is reproduced with EMMD. So that again is quite encouraging. And again, what is really interesting is if we use simple CPUs, for those of us who do not have access to extreme computational resources, we find that, EMMD is encouraging because, we can use at least 2 orders of magnitude less computational time and more or less converge into the free energy transition barriers that is relevant for a given system. Down the line, we have also worked with variational approaches where we do not use a fixed set of distributions. We kind of vary the distributions depending on, how the collective variable proceeds. But we also thought that we could use this the biases, we could more or less narrow down on the magnitude of the bias and perhaps use that information into a conventional sampling method and, come down to, not wasting any time into finding the magnitude of the bias itself. Of course, finding the correct collective variable for a more complicated system is a problem by itself, which I'm going to relate in our ongoing journey. So then we decided to see to what extent we could, push our limits. So it is okay to do it for proline and alanine dipeptide, but what if we try EMMD for an actual complex protein system? And that is something we started trying. So we have looked at one of these kinases whose conformation was reported very recently in its active as well as 2 inactive states. The ABL kinase belongs to the tyrosine kinase family. It has a lot of biological relevance here. And so you have cytoskeleton remodeling. It can respond to DNA damages, being a kinase actually. It belongs to the SRC family of kinases. You can have fusion proteins and it can trigger oncogenic pathways. So essentially we really need to know, what are the transition states between the active and the putative inactive states. So if we want to actually map down the key structural elements of this protein, it turns out that there's an A loop, okay, which I have highlighted here. There's a DFG motif, there's a phenylalanine right here, okay. So you have a DFG motif, a short motif, which has a recurring importance here. there's a hydrophobic pocket here, and there's another hydrophobic pocket at this region. Okay. And it turns out, this is experimentally shown by Zhao et al., that the active state is the dominant state. Okay, it occupies about 88% of the ensemble. And then you have two inactive states. Okay, I'm going over this again. And essentially what happens between the active states and the one clear signature of the transition from the active to the inactive is the flip of this phenylalanine. Okay, we are showing here the flips. Now, this is kind of a summary of the key differences between the active and the inactive states. The A loop is open and all. The P loop goes from a kinked to a stretched form, and the DFG motive goes from the in to the out form. Okay, so we kind of started narrowing in on the DFG motive, and there are some key features of the structural transition. Okay, so what we started guessing around is perhaps the A loop backbone dihedrals, the A loop RMSD, the DFG movement, or the root mean square deviation between the relative RMSD between the active and the inactive state, or even the ion pair distance between glycine and lysine. These could possibly, or a combination of these could give us, useful collective variables, and perhaps we could go back to implementing EMMD after that. Now, it turns out that if we design a collective variable of this kind, where we simply look at the center of mass distance from the DFG motive to the hydrophobic pockets 1 and 2, we kind of reproduce, certain signatures of what is available experimentally. So CVDFG, we call this CVDFG. It's a scaled difference, between D1 and D2 here, okay, divided by D0. CVDFG clearly differentiates the active and the inactive states. And, what is not shown here are the corresponding values from the experimental data, from the NMR data, and it turns out that if you estimate the CVDFG, they sit right there. They sit right between the distributions that you get from direct sampling. So we thought that CVDFG would be a good idea to, a good starting point for the collective variable. Again, if you project the distance of CVDFG from the hydrophobic pocket, or the leucine 373 from hydrophobic pocket 1, and leucine 267 from hydrophobic, the central motif of CVDFG from these two pockets, we find that, that clearly demarcates the active, inactive 1 and the inactive 2 states. Then, if you start doing a conventional sampling, starting either from one of the two inactive states, and you believe that you should be able to, go to the active state, using these as the collective variables, you find that, it actually depends on your starting state. Perhaps it's an artifact of insufficient sampling. These are results from ABMD simulations. Perhaps we need to go further in sampling. But clearly, depending on where you start from, you either end up in the active state or you do not. So clearly, even these collective variables are inadequate. And actually, if you look at the state that you end up with over here and look at its RMSD with respect to the experimentally reported active state, you find that you come up with huge RMSDs. In other words, even if you hit upon these collective variables, even if you hit your target, there are other degeneracies in the collective variable space, and which you are unable to model with this simple collective variable. So there are significant deviations from the experimental states if we take this approach. So obviously we have to improve our approach. And what we did after that is that we started looking at the projections of CVDFG into the other collective variables, into the other, and possibly coming up with other reaction coordinates. So, if we use independent trajectories, and if we use variational Bayesian Gaussian mixture, again, our journey was a little bit of a trial and error. So what we find that if you look at the projections of the DFG into different states, what you will end up getting is, if you really introspect the extent of correlation of CVDFG with some of the torsional angles involved with the other pockets, we are looking at alanine 399, and it turns out that it is extremely well correlated with CVDFG. And if we look at lysine 419, okay, it is actually much less correlated with CVDFG. So it's possible that these two, themselves could be a combination which would map out the conformational space of this protein. And it turns out that that guess may not be a very bad idea. So again, we have to switch back to von Mises because, Gaussian mixture models is perhaps not the exact way to do it. So a combination of these two CVs perhaps will be, one way forward. We could perhaps map out the inactive 1, inactive 2, and the active states. With this combination, we are still searching. Okay, so we also started looking at, using the simple root mean square with respect to the active state. Is that going to be a more appropriate way? Can we use a combination of this particular collective variable with some others? So that is also something that we are looking at. And we are also looking at the ion pair distance. If you have lysine 290 and glutamate 305, which is in the alpha helix, it's an interaction which is required for catalysis. And can we construct variational Bayesian GMMs over that? That is also something that we are looking at. And we don't know. We don't know yet what is the best combination. But, hopefully, if we look, deeply enough, we'll be able to come up with a combination which will actually give us a suitable mapping up of the entire degrees of freedom. That is also, again, something that we are looking at. But again, we do feel that given the importance of this particular collective variable, the CVDFG, okay, given that, this particular flip is so much of a key change, a key signature of the transition from one state to the other. Something which is related to this conformational change is going to be a good signature of the transition from active to the inactive state. And we need to keep looking at the magnitude of change with respect to the experimental reported values. So with that, we are hopeful that we will be able to find the transition state barrier, even the conformations, not just the heights of the intermediary states that has been experimentally reported between the active and the inactive states of this particular kinase. And we are also working with certain collaborations here in ICER to, extend this to other kinases as well. Okay, so actually I'm done a little bit ahead, so that saves me some time. But in summary, EMMD is a barrier estimation methods for systems with known stationary states. It is actually many-fold more efficient compared to traditional methods. It at least gives us the height of the barriers, in a very quick way. And once we have the heights of those barriers, we can use that as a feedback into, informing the biases for more conventional methods. It could be potentially efficient for systems with more degrees of freedom, as we saw with the kinase. But then we have to actually find out, which collective variables are going to be exact. We have to actually find the degeneracy, and we have to find, which are the collective variables which could be discarded and which are the ones which should be retained. We can provide bias estimates for conventional enhanced sampling. That's something that I said. Potentially efficient. I'm sorry, this got repeated. And again, if we could combine it with a smart CV search with some of the algorithms which are being presented in the RARE conference, that is something that we are looking forward to. If we could combine EMMD with other efficient CV search methods, then that could be, that could give us something which will take this entire method forward. And we are also looking at, extending EMMD to multiple dimensions. We could use variational approaches to automate model selections for more complex systems. So with that, I've come to the end of the talk. And of course, I first thank you for your attention. And I also thank the organizers for giving us a platform to present our very nascent work in this domain. We are still burgeoning in this direction, but we hope to take it forward as we go along. And once again, this work would not have come to this form had it not been for Pallab and Moitro and that initial discussion we had a few years back. And as we continue our journey, we look forward to more interactions with the platform here. Thank you very much. And Arnob,
thank you. Very nice talk. So there are a couple of questions I can see in the chat box. So first question is by Anand. So, so he's asking that do the Gaussian or von Mises mixture distribution models take into consideration of the slowest CV, or the method is independent of that?
For the time being, the method is independent of that. We have to say that because, it actually depends. You have to supply a CV at this stage. We are not, and since we supply a CV at this point, we are not at that late stage of a development where we can actually say that this CV is, represents the slowest degree of freedom. We are working on it, but for the time being, the way EMMD stands as of date, there are other developments going on, and there are some more students who have started working on this. But at this stage, this depends, on the degree of freedom that we select. So it does not necessarily represent the slowest degree of freedom.
Yeah. So in the same context, when you get this particular barrier height for a given CV, does it match with the conventional methods that already are known?
Yes. So at least for simple systems, as we saw for alanine dipeptide and proline, it does very well. But again, we are trying to be a little bit more ambitious here. We are trying to map it out with kinases. We are also actually, I did not cover that story because it's not even halfway. We are also trying to map it out with perhaps, proteins that are prone to self-assembly. So we'll see, perhaps we could hopefully be able to take it to a stage where, it will be, it will match the conventional methods better, and better, and B, hopefully it will also be representative, or it will also capture the slowest degrees of freedom.
Okay. So next question is by Dhiman Roy. So he's asking that if you use the experimental related population of different states as the parameter in your model, can you calculate the population of the transition state and barrier heights?
So that is exactly what we are trying to do here. So, this is, we are working with, there's some a priori knowledge at this stage that we do need. We need to know the, we need to feed in the absolute free energy difference between the so-called minima. So what we want to find is the relative barrier height. If you go from state 1 to state 2, what is the height that you have to cover? So that is exactly what we are trying to find. Okay. We cannot at this time, find the minima themselves. So this is more about estimating the barrier height, which are separating different minima in the energy landscape.
So Jagannath has a comment saying that I agree with you that EMMD can be a great tool if CV search aspect can be explored with other similar techniques or smart techniques. That's what his comment is. Okay, so next question is by Aparna, saying what is the barrier height obtained for disulfide reduction, and which will be the best CV possible to address this reaction?
Aparna, we thank you for the question. That is something that we need to do. We haven't tried that yet. So in that particular work where EMMD was not used, I put that slide because I wanted to kind of convey our journey. We, with all the things that we do, we frequently encounter situations which need extensive free energy sampling. And most of us do not have access to extreme resources. And hence that was an inspiration to build a model or a neater method like this. So we really would like to understand that when I'm creating a perturbation and we are going from, a more integrated state to a more dissociated state of, say, the NS1 protein of Zika virus. Okay, so what is going to be the barrier height? Now, that is, a few people have told me that that could be another system on which to try EMMD, but we haven't come around to that yet. And we really don't know, but I think I cannot make a wild guess, but it is going to be at least more than several KT. That is my guess. I really don't know the exact answer yet.
Okay, so thank you, Nilanjana, for a very interesting talk. I think
Thank
if
you,
you
Arnab.
have, more, if there are more questions, you can address them in the chat box.